I grew up with wind energy. My family has been doing wind energy since I was 8 years old, and we started doing that coming from environmental protection. So the idea was we're trying to do this to actually save the planet. When we started doing this, everyone who looked at us going into business to do wind energy said, that's stupid, you're never going to make money with this. After that, I went to study in England, in London, and surprise, surprise, I did what almost everyone else did. At my school, I went to Goldman Sachs, and we didn't exactly save the planet there. So I left after a year and a half, decided to come to Bulgaria to set up business here, set up Yen-Vижън Енерджи, my company, working with my colleagues over here to do wind energy again. And then in the end, we ended up with the Bulgarian Wind Energy Association. The presentation now has two parts. First, basically, why did I decide to come here and how come we got this Wind Energy Association, what happened in the market. And then the second part, which is much more interesting, is facts about wind energy. So background, why did people like me and a lot of others decide to come to Bulgaria to do wind energy? The starting conditions in Bulgaria were good. There's wind here at the coast, in the mountains, and in other places. We had a good law until recently, and we had a fixed exchange rate, good fiscal conditions. If you compare the budget of Bulgaria to the budget of Greece, it's much more stable to do business here. So far, so good. Then 2007, Bulgaria joined the EU. We had the climate targets, and everyone thought, yes, now we can get going, and we can do wind energy here. We came here, all of our competitors from Western Europe came here, a lot of entrepreneurs in the country here got into wind energy. And then we had this, in English, instant viability. From one moment to the next, the market got doable and interesting, and we all got into it. But then from there, we went to Zlatna Treska, to a gold rush. Why? We had this instant viability. We all came in. But added to that came the real estate sector collapsed almost at the same time, and a lot of people figured, well, I know how to build hotels or apartment blocks, can't be that much different to do wind energy projects. So they also moved into our market. And then a third one was, at the same time, the markets in Spain, Italy, and the Czech Republic, they already had a boom. They slowed down, so a lot of the people who wanted to invest in those countries basically went along the map of Europe and ended up, oh, Bulgaria, let's go there. Result, bye-bye reality. What does bye-bye reality look like? This year, 7,000 megawatt is the maximum amount of electricity that Bulgaria ever consumes. In the middle of January, when it's really cold, when everyone uses their heating and their lighting, this is how much electricity we consume. Today, we have this much wind energy working in the country. We have a bit more installed on the ground, but not working yet, thanks to people like Ion and EVN. This is how much we have licensed. That's quite a bit. This is how much has some kind of contract with someone. And the best one is this here. This is, if you add up everything that's talked about, just in wind energy. If you add solar energy to this, you're above 20,000, and it makes no sense. It's technically impossible. The reason why we have renewable energies in Bulgaria is because we need to reach the EU 2020 targets. We think, really, we need to end up in this range in 9 years from now, in 2020. So, needless to say, we're a bit over the top. And it gets worse if you look at where these projects are. That's a rough map of where wind energy projects are in Bulgaria. And you can see that almost everything is out here where the birds are. And that makes no sense because electricity, renewable energy works if it's spread around the whole country, if it's close to the people who need the electricity. And this is the electricity grid of Bulgaria, roughly. And you can see that most of it is out here where all of us live, where most of the population and most of the electricity consumption in Bulgaria is. And it simply doesn't make sense to put all the renewables in this corner, then build a bunch of power lines over here and consume it at the other end of the country. So this is how we said bye-bye to reality. And the consequence of what happened here over the last few years was we overburdened the institutions. You can imagine the pile of applications and paper on the desk of people in the electricity companies, in Rio Save, in the municipalities. Makes no sense. We reached a technical capacity. If you try to add a lot more renewable energies in northeast Bulgaria, you turn the electricity grid into a giant toaster. It just doesn't work. And there was a fear that grew in the political area that, well, we're going to shoot way beyond these 2020 targets. Consequence, we had a political counter-reaction. We had BG Weyer, and we have me here. So me here and BG Weyer we see now. Let's look at political counter-reaction. Political counter-reaction meant there was an attempt to regulate the market more. That's natural. It's a regulated market. We have subsidized electricity prices. It's natural that the government wants to get in there and control this market. And more control and calming this market down is a good thing. We don't need stupidly high numbers. They're not in favor of anyone who wants to do good business, and they don't help. Obache, however, in the end, the government, with what has happened now over the last few weeks, went to the exact opposite extreme. We got a new renewable energy law, which we think is going to stop our market. Just last week, there was a vote to ban solar energy on 28% of the country, on the agricultural land. And there has been a lot of fear-mongering and screaming and complaining. There's not a week where Boyko doesn't go out and complain about renewable energies at the moment. So a lot of myths instead of facts. And that's going to be the second part. But to talk about this graphically, normally if you have the growth rate of renewable energies over time, the way this looks in a normally regulated market, you have ups and downs as the government is trying to get the regulation right, so you go in a normal corridor of development. The problem is in Bulgaria right now, it looks a bit more like this. And no kidding, we had this massive growth. That went for a few years, and now we have a law that completely cuts off the industry. The problem is every time you have one of these ups and downs in here, it just makes everyone nervous. It scares away investors, it undermines trust in the country, and it's just not a good thing. So, summary of part one, the boring part. We had this instant viability, we had a very fast development as a consequence of it, and then we had the political counter-reaction. With a new law, which we think stops the market. What we are working hard as an industry is to try and get to a point where we say, we have something that's, well, unpleasant. It should slow down the business, but it shouldn't kill it. And we would like to get more into facts rather than myths about our market. So that's part two, mythovi I fakti, or why I actually love my job, why I got into it. So let's start with facts. Simple things. Let's look at a single wind turbine just to get a feeling for what does this actually do. So a single wind turbine has a power of 2 to 3 megawatt. That's 2,000 to 3,000 kilowatt. If you compare this to the power of a car, 25 to 40 cars, depending on how fat your car is. If it's old Bulgarian businessmen, it's a few cars only. But wind energy creates a lot of jobs, both in the manufacturing but also in the operation of it. So every time you see a wind turbine, it's roughly a half permanent job. So 2 wind turbines equals 1 new job. And then on the environmental side is where it gets interesting. With a single wind turbine, we produce on average about as much electricity as 2,000 households in Bulgaria consume. If you look at the CO2 that we save, 12,000 tons of CO2 every year. That's the equivalent of 14,500 cars. That's a medium-sized town worth of cars that we can offset in CO2 emissions. If over the lifetime you wanted to produce the electricity that a wind turbine produces using coal in a coal power station, you would need over 100,000 tons of coal. If you take that coal, you stick it into shipping containers, and you line up these shipping containers behind each other, you end up with a 25-kilometer long row of shipping containers. And lastly, we don't need cooling water like nuclear power stations or thermal power stations, which means the amount of water that we save, and this is in a single year, is 13 million liters of water, which is enough for 115,000 bathtubs, which is probably more than all of us here need combined. So that's facts. Let's look at myth of it. Wind turbines are terribly loud. If you live close to one, you can't sleep and you will go insane. We actually had one in Germany, which was if you have cows close to the wind turbine, they go crazy and the milk gets sour because of the noise. No kidding, we had it. So let's look at noise. Noise in decibel. This here is where wind turbines come in. If you're 350 meters away from a wind turbine in full operation, it comes in at about 35 decibel. This is roughly the noise that a computer makes in your office from the fan in the back. So you can hear this humming in the background here. Now that's louder than 35 decibel. Plus 350 meters is closer than we're allowed to build to villages. We have to stay 500 to 800 meters away anyway. Compared to other sound sources, in your house, it's more noisy. You wouldn't be able to hear the wind turbine anymore. And then if you compare it to industry, obviously that's a lot more noisy. Next myth, animation. When it comes to birds, the myth is we are out to go and kill them. And that's a serious thing to think about, and there are studies about this. So here's a study that was done on bird mortality in the US. Basically, what causes unnatural deaths of birds. The main killer of birds is buildings, mostly windows on buildings. Bird doesn't see window, flies into window. Killer number 2, like we just heard, electricity grid, because either the bird collides with the poles, or if it's a large bird with the wingspan, it touches 2 wires at the same time and gets electrocuted. Killer number 3 of birds is cats, followed by cars, followed by pesticides. And then a very long way down the road comes wind turbines. In numbers in the US, these are the total numbers. And keep in mind here, the US has a lot of wind power. They have the second most installed wind turbines in the world. If you break this down specifically, you get down to a single cat on average manages to kill between 5 and 100 birds in a year. Deaths from wind turbines are between 0 and 2. The thing is, even 2 is not nice. And wind turbines cause problems for bigger, more rare birds. So it's important that whenever you do a wind project, you get careful about it. And this is why actually a lot of our members work with the Bird Protection Society to do bird studies, to make sure that we don't get in the way of rare birds. And obviously also with the cats, it depends on the cats. This is my monster at home. So last week on breakfast television, I said theoretically my own cats could be more harmful to birds than the wind turbines in Bulgaria. Not really true. We take away all your money because we're so expensive. Let's look at all the countries in the European Union and at the price of electricity in these countries. This is the price in lever per kilowatt hour of electricity that you pay all across Europe. And then, surprise, surprise, at the very bottom comes in Bulgaria. Nowhere else in Europe is electricity as cheap as here. And then when you look at wind energy, we come in here. At home, we pay about 17 stotinki per kilowatt hour for electricity. Wind energy, we get between 17 and 19 stotinki per kilowatt hour. On top of that, wind energy gets cheaper every year, just like solar electricity. Everything else gets more expensive because you need coal, oil, gas, uranium, and all of these things get more expensive. And this means if someone keeps on telling you, and even if that someone is the prime minister, and comes out and says, well, if we have these renewables, guys, electricity prices are going to increase 10 times, 18 times, it's not true. No matter how often they say it, it's just not true. If you look at this specifically for you at home, this here is the average Bulgarian electricity bill. On average, we pay about 45 leva a month for electricity. If you take the same number and then you do a calculation to see how much would we add to that bill if we have 750 megawatts of wind energy operating, the number is we'd add 28 stotinki to this. If we say, well, let's see what would happen in 2020 if we go to 2,500 megawatts, the number would be 92 stotinki. So not even a lever more to reach the 2020 targets. And the interesting thing is when you then look at, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is we say, well, renewables are too expensive, we won't care about them, and let's just not care about the EU 2020 targets, and we miss them. What we've calculated is if we miss the EU 2020 targets by just 1%, then the EU will come in and say, well, you're short 1%, go and buy that from another country which has more renewables than it needs to, and on average, this is the assumption what the price would be. So that's a lot more expensive than if we do it at home. And lastly, the horror scenario, if we talk about fear-mongering, is let's assume we actually manage to kill off renewables completely today, not do anything more until 2020 and miss by several percent. We would almost double our electricity bills in the process. I'm out of time and I'm done. So question is, what do we do now? We're stubborn. We'll stay here. Personally, myself and a lot of my colleagues, we believe what we do is a very good thing for the country, for business, for the nature. So we'll stick this out and we'll wait and we'll fight to make things better. If I could wish for something to see more of in this country, it's courage. Courage to do critical thinking, to when someone comes out and says renewables is expensive, and I come out and say it's cheap, don't believe either of us, check for yourself. Go and figure it out. Same with, I say we don't kill birds, someone else says we kill birds, check it. Don't trust people, figure it out, and then have the courage to get involved and challenge when people say dumb things in public. Don't let yourself be played for dumb. Thank you. One more. One more actually. There's one thing I can't argue with. If someone says, I find wind turbines ugly, I don't want to see them, I like them, but if you don't like them, that's a personal matter. Just to make a comment about this is a painting by Claude Monet. It's called Tulip Fields in Holland. The windmill is in the initial title. He doesn't even mention the windmill because it's just a natural thing. Back then, a natural part of the environment of Holland was windmills. And I think we're getting to a point where wind turbines and renewable energies, solar panels on the roofs of almost every building are becoming just as much a part of our natural landscape. Thanks.